We're now more than 1 hour in and approaching the Armstrong line. Now, what the Armstrong line is a special line where, without pressurization, the body's fluids would bubble and boil away. That is the saliva, the tears, the lining of the lungs. Even oxygen doesn't help when you pass through the Armstrong line. You need a pressurized suit or cabin. So the Armstrong line was named for Professor Harry George Armstrong, who founded the U.S. Air Force Department of Space Medicine back in 1947. The Armstrong line at 63,000 feet up. There you see the pressure in the capsule at 8 psi, and outside down to 0.51 psi. So that's why you have the Armstrong line, that phenomenon. So it's 1/14 of the pressure inside the capsule. The pressure on Earth, by the way, psi, at sea level, is 14.7 pounds per square inch. Temperature outside, where we are now, at 63,000 feet, the Armstrong line, minus 86 Celsius. Minus 86 Fahrenheit, sorry. Minus 86 degrees below zero. There, Baumgartner's mother, Eva, from Salzburg, Austria, looking pleased, happy. She and Baumgartner's father, Felix Baumgartner Sr., made this trip, as I mentioned before, their first time out of Europe. And his brother as well. His brother's a chef right outside Salzburg. And they've had something of a trying time here waiting, because we tried to get this flight off 5 days ago and failed because of a gust of wind that came along and knocked down the balloon as it was just starting to inflate. So quite a feat in getting this balloon off this morning, because it was the backup balloon and the only other one immediately available. So if they'd not gotten this off today, there would have been a delay of at least some weeks in getting another balloon. There's a infrared shot of Felix Baumgartner's balloon, the largest balloon ever to be used to haul a man up to this kind of altitude. Well, largest balloon ever used to haul any human being aloft. So big because it's going to such a high altitude. Already at 65,000 feet now. Baumgartner was at this altitude twice before this year. The first time back in March, when he jumped from 71,600 feet, 13.5 miles up, and then a second jump in July from 97,000 feet, 18.5 miles up. So again, what's happening today is Baumgartner hopes to break the record for a jump from the highest altitude, hopes to come down faster than any other human being, breaking the speed of sound, first time for a human being outside of an aircraft. Last longer in that free fall than any free faller has ever done before. Hopes to last for about 5 minutes and 30 seconds before he pulls the parachute cord and floats back for the last 5,000 feet. Joe Kittinger's jump that's the standing record for long-lasting free fall. In fact, Kittinger holds the record for all three things right now. The highest jump at 102,800 or 19 miles up, fastest free fall at 614 miles an hour, and the longest lasting free fall at 4 minutes and 38 seconds. There's one other record at issue today, and that is for the highest manned balloon flight. That's one record that's not held by Kittinger. The highest manned balloon flight was in 1961, set by two Navy flyers over the Gulf of Mexico, Malcolm Ross and Victor Prather. And they went to an altitude of 113,740 feet. So that's 21 and a half miles, even higher than Kittinger went for his jump. And then they came back down in the balloon, so it wasn't a jump. But it ended tragically when they landed in the Gulf of Mexico. Victor Prather they were being picked up in the Gulf of Mexico by a helicopter, and tragically Prather slipped out of the sling as the helicopter picked them up off the waters of the Gulf of Mexico and drowned. So let's take a look at some of the events that led up to this point, to our there's the capsule as it came out of the hangar around midnight last night, suspended from the crane. There's the helium arriving at the launch site. There's a wide shot of the launch site in the darkness. There's Felix Baumgartner, 3 o'clock in the morning when he arrived here at the launch pad, being escorted by his performance director, Andy Walsh. There is Baumgartner looking over the capsule. Outside the capsule, contemplative. There is the balloon as it was first unpacked from its crate, laid out on the runway, and once that balloon is unpacked from the crate, it's committed. Has to be used that day or can't be reused, at least not for a manned flight. There was Baumgartner before he put his helmet on. Now this is all from early hours of this morning. Now with the helmet on and now emerging from his trailer and being lifted up to the capsule and then into the capsule. There's the balloon as it was being inflated. And there is a repeat of that picture-perfect launch.
Your release.
And the cheers going up for Mission Control and the family. Cheers for Mission Control. Live again, back out at 67,000, nearly 68,000 feet. There's the interior of the capsule with Baumgartner's checklists. Now 1 hour and 10 minutes into this flight. Close-up of Baumgartner. Baumgartner has 4 different oxygen systems on board for his safety in the capsule. This is Red Bull Stratos, Mission to the Edge of Space, live from Roswell, New Mexico. You're watching Red Bull Stratos Mission from the Edge of Space, and it's being filmed by the BBC as well for a documentary to be shown about a month from now, and from the National Geographic channel, which will show this documentary as well, a 2-hour version. That's coming up in about a month. Watch for it. So we're at 71,000 feet now. The capsule at 52 degrees Fahrenheit inside. Outside, it's down to minus 71 degrees below zero. And there's the air pressure. You see how the differential is growing. 7.92 psi inside the capsule, 0.15 ps outside. So many, many times smaller the pressure outside. And we're just now coming up on the altitude at which Baumgartner made his first test jump here back in March. He had made a number of other test jumps out in California from much lower altitude, but this one was from 71,615 feet, so you can see just a few feet below where he is right now. He jumped and reached a speed of 365 miles an hour on his free fall. And then later, Baumgartner jumped from a still higher altitude. In July, he jumped from 97,145 feet, so 18 and a half miles high. That's a mirror that Baumgartner can use to see behind him. Particularly, he can look at the oxygen tanks on his back. A little anecdote. When they were doing the checklist rehearsal for when he gets ready to jump, there's one point at which Joe Kittinger is supposed to tell him that the parachute on his back looks okay. It's because Baumgartner actually can't see that parachute himself because of all that gear and the helmet he has and everything. So Kittinger has to tell him from the camera that the parachute has not accidentally deployed early in the capsule and is not hanging out. So in the last jump, Baumgartner couldn't hear Kittinger say that the parachute was okay, that it had not accidentally deployed. And so he jumped not knowing. And later he said he was quite anxious about that. But of course everything was all right. There continues to be some concern about the rate of ascent and the winds that have pushed this capsule to the east. They dropped some ballast already in an effort to gain altitude while not spending as much time moving to the east. So now they're talking about dropping some more ballast. You've heard him talk of the pods when they do the checklist. The pods refer to those instrument panels, like the little square panel there over his left shoulder. That's one of the pods. And it has the various gauges that keep track of the oxygen and nitrogen flow into the capsule to keep the capsule safe. There is a spectacular shot from the ground, looking up at the balloon from one of those tracking trucks that we mentioned. The capsule air now at 28.8% oxygen. Now there's some good news about the concerns about the rate at which the balloon and capsule were floating to the east. As I mentioned, there had been some concern about that. But it appears now that the capsule is high enough that it's reaching a level where the winds turn around up there and will bring the capsule back in our direction, in the direction of Roswell a little bit, if the calculations by the meteorologist, Don Day, are correct. So you see that oxygen in the capsules on the high side there. They don't like to get it above 30, because that's perceived as a kind of a fire threat. They just like to keep it below 30 and between 30 and 20, more favoring the 20 side. We're up now where you can actually see the curvature of the Earth. It's not as dramatic as that curve looks because of the wide angle of the camera lens, but nonetheless, people who have been that high say that you can begin to see the curvature of the Earth and the black of the sky in the high altitude looking straight up. That capsule speed has slowed considerably now, moving at just 17 miles an hour. And let's see, we're heading south, if I interpret that compass correctly. So that's good because he's not heading west. There's the infrared shot. And when Baumgartner jumps, you'll see that probably in the early stages, mostly as an infrared shot, because it's the one camera that can reach out and show with any clarity the jump itself. Talk about that jump for a moment, because that's what this mission is all about. Again, I mentioned that to exit the capsule, he has to dump the air pressure that's in the capsule so that he can get the door open. He equalizes it with the low pressure outside. But as he does that, his suit, which has the ambient pressure already in it that he left with from the surface of the Earth, that will begin to inflate because the pressure is being brought down in the capsule. So the suit inflates by itself, so to speak. But that now protects him, the suit. So we are going, I'm not sure whether you could hear that or not, but the meteorologist, Don Day, has said that we are moving southwest, as that compass in our graphic indicated, and that should allay any concerns about going too far to the east. Some of the thoughts about why they would have been concerned about going too far to the east. The population builds as you get over by the Texas state line in the east. And it's easier to recover Baumgartner after he reaches ground when he's closer. So they didn't like to let him get too far away. Now at nearly 79,000 feet. So he started to talk about that jump. When he jumps out, the air is so thin that if he breaks the sound barrier, as he hopes to, it would occur probably about 30 seconds into that jump. That's the calculation. And then he would hold that speed above the sound barrier, above Mach 1, would hold it for maybe another 20 seconds. And then he'd come back through the sound barrier. And from there on, he'd be falling so rapidly that the air would be getting just a little more dense. And that would actually begin to slow his speed. Slow is a relative term, because he'd still be falling at hundreds of miles an hour. But from there on, that speed would slow as the air became denser and denser as he approached ground. The balloon at almost 80,000 feet now. I believe it's already passed through the coldest of the outdoor temperatures. This is Red Bull Stratos, Mission to the Edge of Space, coming to you live from Roswell, New Mexico. This is Red Bull Stratos, mission to the edge of space, live from Roswell, New Mexico. We're at 84,000 feet, approaching 85,000 feet now. Floating probably in the area of about 50 miles east of Roswell, New Mexico. And there you see the ground 85,000 feet below. The scrub prairie of eastern New Mexico. We're up in the area now where the highest flying aircraft, like the spy plane, the SR-71, the Blackbird, the area that they operate at. So we're about as high as airplanes will go. Also about as high as weather balloons go. There you see Baumgartner with his sun visor down. As they climb, there's a minor issue reported with his faceplate heater, which they're troubleshooting, trying to see whether that faceplate has heat or not. The face visor has 111 tiny wires in there to prevent fogging and icing. So there's an issue with that, the precise nature of which we're not sure. But they're troubleshooting that, trying to work that out, see what it is. Temperature inside the capsule now, 51 degrees. So that's warm enough in the capsule. And outside, it's minus 48 degrees Fahrenheit. There's looking skyward, so that's from underneath the capsule, looking up. Kittinger spoke about how black that sky is, about when he was on his present record setting, that is setting the present record, back in 1960. He got up at altitude, he said, looking up, he said this on the radio, so there's a transcript of it. He said, looking up, the sky is absolutely black, void of anything. I can see the beautiful blue of the sky, and above that it goes into a deep, deep, dark, indescribable blue, which no artist can ever duplicate. And then he added, it's fantastic. Capsule has slowed to 14 miles an hour, heading in a westerly direction now. So that is back in the direction from which it was launched. So it went out about approximately 50 miles, maybe a little farther than that, because it was pushed along by those extremely high winds in the jet stream. And now is drifting back in this direction. Take a look here in a moment at some of what has transpired so far on this momentous day. There is the capsule shortly after midnight tonight. As it came out of the hangar, the helium and big tanks delivered to the launch pad. Launch pad in the dark. Felix Baumgartner arriving here, still not suited up, 3 in the morning local time, which is mountain time. There he is inspecting the capsule before he suited up. unpacking or laying out the balloon. And there, Baumgartner inside the capsule, helmeted now. No, not inside the capsule. He's still going in from his trailer and being lifted now on that lift up to the capsule and then going in the capsule. All of this earlier today. This was as the sun rose over Roswell, and there was the beginning of the inflation of this giant balloon. Here again, the choreography of that beautiful liftoff. And this again earlier today, Baumgartner's mother.
Lots 2 pressure.
Still earlier today. Now we're back out live. 90,000 feet on that balloon, and we've passed the 1.5 hour mark. They said it would take about 2 hours to reach what they call the float altitude. Float altitude is the altitude at which the balloon stops rising and levels off. And you can't really control a balloon. We talked a little bit earlier about dropping some ballast. So you can control the altitude a little bit that way. So when the balloon reaches float altitude, Baumgartner will dump the pressure in the capsule, step out onto the little porch. So you see how that heat is rising outside now, the temperature. It dropped down to as low as 90 degrees below zero, 90-something below zero. Now it's coming back up again. That's what happens in the stratosphere. It gets colder as you go higher and higher, and then at a point you reach the coldest. And now, because you're getting into thinner air and actually reducing the distance to the sun, the atmosphere, or stratosphere in this case, slowly begins to warm again. "92,000 feet now, 28,000 meters. And again, to mention their troubleshooting, an issue with the heat in the face visor. There's the air pressure outside the capsule, down to 0.05 pounds per square inch, as opposed to 7.89 psi inside the capsule. Psi at the level of the Earth is 14.7. Capsule air, 26% oxygen. The ambient air at sea level is 21% oxygen. The rest of it, almost the rest of it, all of the rest of it, is nitrogen. So the nitrogen and the oxygen are pumped into the capsule, and they try to maintain a balance. So we're traveling up. Still a pretty good clip, 1,000 feet per minute. That was speed right from the start. Capsule track, still heading west, coming back toward Roswell. You see the little compass over on screen right. 10 miles an hour, 9 miles an hour. Really slowing now up in this higher altitude. Not too long before we hit the 100,000 foot mark. So they're continuing to troubleshoot the issue with the heat on the faceplate or visor, considering options, but they are still on the ascent at this point. Now, we mentioned when we reached the altitude at which Baumgartner had jumped back in March. Now we're approaching the altitude from which he jumped in July. That was 97,000 feet, so we're getting there. 18.5-mile jump that was, back in July. There again, you see that dark sky and the curvature, which is somewhat falsely accentuated by the wide-angle camera lens. But nonetheless, people who have been that high say that you can begin to see the curvature of the Earth when you get up around 70,000, 80,000 feet above the Earth, and you certainly see that darkening of the sky. Now 1 hour and 42 minutes into what had been estimated to be a 2-hour climb up to 120, maybe as high as 130,000 feet. A lot of media here covering this event today. There's a infrared shot of the balloon. And it's beginning to change shape now as it gets into that high altitude. We talked about how it starts out as a teardrop and then expands into a big fat shape. It'll get much fatter than that by the time it gets up to 120,000 feet. So the video of today's events here are being transmitted live to more than 40 television outlets in some 50 nations worldwide. Also, this broadcast is being streamed live to 130 of the world's leading websites on the internet. Coming up on 1 hour and 3/4 into this launch. And getting very close now to Baumgartner's July jump, which stands as the second highest jump from a balloon ever. Joe Kittinger, here in Mission Control, owns the record for the highest jump. Kittinger's jump back in 1960, part of an Air Force high-altitude experimental program, was from 19 miles up, more than 19 miles, 102,800. So again, to review the records, Kittinger's jump stands as the highest jump, the fastest free fall at 614 miles an hour, still shy, however, of Mach, the speed of sound, and the longest lasting free fall at 4 minutes and 36 seconds. So now we're beyond Baumgartner's highest jump to date, the 97,000 feet. So this is higher than Felix Baumgartner has ever been before. Temperature inside the capsule, 51 degrees Fahrenheit. And outside, it continues to warm, so it's 16 degrees below Fahrenheit. Up where he jumps, it'll be even warmer than that, if you can say even warmer about something that far below zero. But not as bad as that 90 degrees below zero, 90-some degrees that it was outside at 70,000 feet. Capsule air there right about where they want it. In our graphic, we tried to arrange those colors so that green in the center means safe, where they want it, and the reds on the outside would be more in the area of question or risky area. Vertical track, still going up, more than 1,000 feet a minute, just slightly more. So now we're just 3,000 feet below the record high altitude from which Joe Kittinger jumped back in 1960. Long way down to that scrub land of eastern New Mexico. And out that far from Roswell, there it is, the existing record for the highest free fall by Joe Kittinger back in 1960. He had some trouble during that jump. His glove tore, exposing a part of his hand. And he didn't tell the people on the ground about it because he was afraid they'd abort the flight, make him come back down in the capsule if he told them. So he didn't tell them, and he went up to altitude with that little tear in the glove. But what happens is that the pressure from outside was enough to hold the glove close to his skin to prevent terrible trouble. What did happen, his hand swelled to what they say was almost twice the size of a normal hand. But he managed to operate all right. He couldn't do anything with that hand, but he was all right, and he made the free fall successfully. He also had a little problem coming down. He choked for a while, couldn't catch his breath, and he later wasn't ever sure what that was about. It was just for a few brief moments, but he thought perhaps it was from a tie-down strap that ties his helmet to his pressure suit. There he is, through the mark. So he now has passed the point from which Joe Kittinger jumped back in 1960. More than 19 miles up. So his next mark will be the record highest manned balloon flight ever, which was actually set a year before Joe Kittinger's jump. Year after, 1961. Kittinger jumped in 1960, and the record highest manned balloon flight was in 1961 by those naval flyers that I mentioned, Malcolm Ross and Victor Prather, over the Gulf of Mexico. And Prather tragically drowned after landing from the successful descent in the balloon. But after that, in the course of the helicopter rescue, slipped off the helicopter sling and drowned. That step you're looking down at is the step that Baumgartner goes out on when he prepares to jump. And it is only the size of a skateboard. You're looking down from the top of the capsule. at the ground below. So Baumgartner would go out on that step, hold on to the rails, and drop from there. So no one is precisely sure where this balloon will stop as it floats up. It was calculated mathematically to stop at about 120,000 feet, maybe 125,000 feet. But in the previous two jumps, the balloon has gone higher than mission control calculated. Those were Baumgartner's previous two jumps earlier this year. Their mission control, the team, still working that issue of the trouble with the heat in the faceplate or visor. Considering the options of what to do about that. Trying to analyze what the source of it is. But the basic problem was reported as at least Baumgartner's perception that the visor was not heating as it should. This is Red Bull Stratos, mission to the edge of space, coming to you live from Roswell, New Mexico. You're watching Red Bull Stratos Mission to the Edge of Space. This is Robert Hager, live from Roswell, New Mexico. We're at 108,000 feet now. There is an issue, a minor problem with the heat in the faceplate, or Felix's visor, which with a temperature of about 50 some degrees in the capsule is not a problem for the moment in the capsule, but would be an issue on jumping. The mission for the time being is continuing as the team considers what are the options. 2 hours into this mission now, pushing 110,000 feet in altitude. That balloon expanding even more. So the next record mark to watch here is the record highest altitude for a manned balloon flight. As we mentioned, 113,740 feet. That U.S. Navy balloon mission, an experimental program back in 1961. So the balloon, on lifting off, floated to the east. Now well through the 110,000 mark, 110,000 foot mark. Floated toward the Texas border, Roswell being located in the south central of New Mexico on the eastern side of the state already. So it floated farther to the east toward the border with Texas, and then on reaching 80,000 feet or so, the wind shifted and it's now headed somewhat back in our direction, in the direction of Roswell. Mission continuing now, coming up on 2 hours. There's a shot from inside the capsule. You see his checklist up there on the side of the capsule. Now we've passed the 2-hour mark. There it is from outside. Again, notice how the shape of that balloon has changed. Baumgartner with that visor down. The light, the glare up there is really something too, the glare of the sun. In an earlier jump, before Kittinger made his record jump, he had been blinded by the glare. In fact, that was a flight full of problems, that first jump. This is before his record jump. It was back in 1959, a year before his record jump. Sun blinded him. He couldn't see the gondola instruments, had a hard time jumping off. Then his drogue chute deployed too soon. 3 seconds into the drop instead of 20 seconds in. Wrapped around his neck, and he started spinning arms out and lost consciousness briefly. But at about 12,000 feet, his main chute opened automatically. and he successfully landed. So we're coming up on this record, the manned balloon flight of 113,740 feet set back in 1961. The infrared shot. So he's through it now. He set the record. So this is the highest any human being has ever gone in a balloon or hauled aloft by a balloon. New record holder is Felix Baumgartner. So that is the first of the records he was shooting for today. Continuing to troubleshoot, try to analyze, go through options for what to do about the problem with the face visor. That shot of the balloon being made from here at Mission Control, so that's remarkable. Let's see, 114,000 feet up. So that's more than 21 miles up. And we're out about 40 miles from Roswell. So that's being shot by the camera here. Shows what those long lenses can do. Two hours and 3 minutes into the flight. Somebody had guessed beforehand that it really might take about 2 hours and 18 minutes to get up to flight level. That was Luke Akins, Felix's skydiving consultant, the mission's skydiving consultant, an accomplished skydiver himself. So Akins guessed that it would be about 2 hours and 18 minutes to get up to float. It's about 7 years ago that this idea was first explored. This particular project begun formally 5 years ago. The capsule built back in 2008. Suit finished in 2009. Then the next year in 2010, there were wind tunnel tests and bungee jumps for technique, figuring out how to jump off, try to free fall at the highest speed possible, but the safest method too, the safest posture for that jump. Then there were preliminary jumps already back then in 2010. 2011 continued with tests in pressure chambers, simulating the maximum altitude, done at Brooks City Base in Texas. Leading up to those two jumps earlier this year, Baumgartner's jump in March of 71,000 feet and his jump in July of 96,000 feet. So that ascent has slowed now. It's about half of the earlier ascent rate of 1,000 feet a minute. That's because of that thin air up there, and the differential is becoming less and less between the helium in the balloon and the thin air outside the balloon. So as it does, the ascent rate slows. Temperature inside the capsule, 52 Fahrenheit, and outside -2, so we mentioned that it would be warmer as he goes up. So if you could say -2 below 0 Fahrenheit is warmer. Why, that's it. There's a tracking camera with a long, long telescopic lens reaching up more than 116,000 feet. And just look at the size. It's approaching now its maximum volume inside, expanding, that helium expanding to nearly 30 million cubic feet of helium. Now there's word from the meteorologist that the projected height of the float would be up around 125,000 feet. So a little less than 10,000 feet higher than we are right now. There we are looking down at eastern New Mexico. I believe that's the ridge that you're seeing out there. As they plotted this flight, it was one of the landmarks below. There's not much to see down there. It's awfully flat, awfully barren, but there is this little ridge, or as they call it here in this country, an escarpment, the Mescalero Ridge. It's a kind of a cliff in that jagged shape that you see there, maybe 7,500 feet high, a differential between the lower land on the one side and the higher land on the other. There's looking up at that balloon from one of our long-range cameras against the blackness of the high-altitude sky, approaching 120,000 feet, and if the calculations of the meteorologist are correct, we are about 5,000, 6,000 feet from where that balloon will level off of its own accord. Temperature in the capsule, 52 degrees, and outside the capsule, it's now above 0 Fahrenheit at 1. Still below 0 centigrade. So still below the freezing mark, 16 below centigrade. And air pressure, 8 in the capsule and 0.1 outside. Balloon still floating up. It's now above what had been set as sort of the mythical float rate or maximum altitude of 120,000, so it's going up. Going up slowly, almost stopping. 8 miles an hour up now. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's the speed across the ground. 8 miles an hour in a southwesterly direction. Vertical track, 1,000 feet a minute. So it's actually speeded up a little bit on the ascent from where it had slowed earlier. Well, we're now more than 1,000 feet up above that original target of 121,000 feet. Still troubleshooting the issue with the heat on the faceplate or visor. Again, 50-some degrees in the capsule, so it's not a problem for there. But it's a problem for exiting the capsule. But it's not certain whether they've lost heat in that visor or not. So now we're going to go through the egress checklist. So the decision has been made, or the options were being considered, that Baumgartner will jump. The other option had been to bring him down in the capsule, let the capsule come down with a parachute. Cut the capsule loose from the balloon, let the capsule parachute down. But even though there's a parachute, when the capsule hits, it's a rough landing. It's got a crush plate below it to protect it, but it's a rough landing. So, decision has been made. Baumgartner will jump. Now they're saying it looks like the balloon is at its maximum altitude afloat. Still rising a little foot by foot, but the rate has certainly gone down. So we're going to go through the egress checklist. So this is the checklist in which he will eventually wind up losing the pressure in the capsule, and as he does that, the flight suit, the pressure suit inflates, so in effect his protection is transferred from the capsule to the flight suit. Now they're saying it is still ascending some. So in the preps for the jump, they'll check all the systems in this checklist that they're about to do. Depressurize the capsule in 2 steps. Depressurize it some to make sure that his pressure suit is inflating as it's supposed to be. And then depressurize it the rest of the way so that he can open the door. And then when he opens the door, preparation for that, he'll cut after he opens the door, he'll cut the oxygen supply, which he's now getting from tanks on the capsule. He'll cut the oxygen supply over to bottles on his back. So the meteorologist is suggesting that they let the capsule continue to climb. He notes that it is still climbing. Balloon now approaching the 125,000 mark, and still it's regained its speed. It started to slow, and now it's regained its rate of climb back to 1,000 feet a minute. Now they're going to open a valve at the top of the balloon and vent a little helium. So that's to stop that ascent. The balloon has special valves on the top, and they can open those valves going up at 2,000 feet a minute now.
Felix, let me know when I can start the
Very fast.
egress check. I need to know when we can start the egress check.
And Joe Kittinger,
I'll let you know. Stand by, too.
capsule communicator, wants to get started on what's called the egress checklist. They'll check the bailout bottles on Felix's back, check his parachute handles. They'll make a little test, close off the oxygen from the capsule and try out the oxygen from his bailout bottles very quickly. They'll activate all the cameras on his pressure suit. He'll slide back and forth in the seat that he's in there, built like the slides on a car seat. Balloon's still going up, 127,000 feet now. So that is higher than 24 miles up. Then they'll, as I mentioned, depressurize the capsule in 2 steps. They'll depressurize it partway, at which point Baumgartner's pressure suit should automatically begin to inflate. So they do it halfway to make sure it's going to inflate. And then they dump the rest of the pressure to equalize the pressure in the capsule to what it is outside. Because now he'll be protected by his pressure suit. Then Felix will open the door. He'll slide the seat back and forth a little bit.
Let me know when I can start the egress check.
Kittinger will do that exercise I mentioned where he looks at on the camera to see that the parachute on Baumgartner's back is okay.
So, handscreen already down, the keep my face. Shield heated, and hopefully it's not freezing up.
Okay, confirm you're ready to start the egress check.
Said something there about the heat and the visor. He's getting the heat. He's getting the heat.
Okay, Joe, I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Felix, item 1. Depressurize the suit, reinstall hose and cover. I need you to respond, Felix. Respond to my commands. Item 1, depressurize suit, reinstall hose and cover. Felix, confirm. Depressurize suit, reinstall hose and cover. Over.
Suit is depressurized and hose and cover are installed.
Attaboy. Item 2, check bailout bottle pressure.
Both bailout bottles looking good. The needle is in the flag.
Thank you. Check location and security of all 4 parachute handles.
All 4 positive handle check.
Okay, thank you. Now, item 4, check door stop to open.
Door stop is open. I can see the green. I repeat, door stop is open. I can read the green.
Thank you. Item 5, stow hand warmer. Turn capsule switch F6 off. Foxtrot 6 off.
Hand warmer is stowed. And Foxtrot 6 is off.
Thank you, Felix. Item 6, activate suit and chest pack cameras. 7, move pilot monitor to the exit position.
Pilot monitor is in the exit position.
Item 8, remove UCD hose, close valve, and zip pocket shut.
CTOs is removed. It's closed and pocket is shut.
Thank you. Item 9, turn O2 and into flow valves to the closed position.
O2 and L2 flow is in the closed position.
Thank you. Item 10 we're going to skip because your sunshade is already down. Item 11, remove vent tube from feeding port.
Tube is removed.
Item 12, set visor heat to full power. We would have done that. Or need a I'm sorry. Felix, item 12, set visor heat to full power. Verify chest pack red LED is on.
Visor heat is the full power. And face heat red LED is on.
Thank you, Felix. Item 13, verify face seal tight.
Verify face seal is tight.
Item 14, move seat to the forward position.
Seat is in the forward position.
Okay, item 15, turn off liquid oxygen supply levers 1 and 2.
Box 1 and box 2 are off. They both went down to 60 psi.
Return the oxygen supply levers back on.
Oxygen supply levers are back on.
Item 18, system pressure 70 psi.
That is correct. System pressure 70 psi.
Item 20, adjust helmet tie down.
Helmet tied on is adjusted.
Okay, we're getting serious now, Felix. Item 21, use the dump valve, depressurize the capsule to 40,000 feet, and confirm a pressure suit inflation. Let me know when it inflates.
I'm pumping the cabin pressure now to 40,000 feet.
And let me know when your suit pressurizes.
see over on the right in that graphic on air pressure, how the air pressure is dropping as he intentionally lowers the air pressure in the capsule.
Yes, sir, positive. It's pressurized.
And now he's confirming that the suit has
Felix,
pressurized,
confirm
I believe.
that your pressure suit is inflated. Over.
Confirmed, Tom. The suit is pressurized.
Thank you, Felix.
So that's
Item
all worked as
23.
it's supposed to.
Remove and stow suit vent hose and suit exhaust hose.
Coalitions are removed.
Okay, Felix, from now on it gets really serious because we're getting ready to depressurize the cabin, and our guardian angel will take care of you. Item 24, depressurize the cabin to ambient altitude, which is 127,800 feet.
I'm doing it now.
Now watch the rest of that pressure drop off. On the graphic on the right-hand side, the upper graphic, the lower graphic as well.
Attention on the net, this is Mission Control. Felix is depressurizing the Stratos capsule to ambient outside barometric pressure. He's at an altitude of 127,900 feet.
So the air outside there is so thin that it's a virtual vacuum, which means that as Felix jumps, he has no resistance. And for the first part of the jump, can't control his position. So what will be critical here is that when he jumps, to avoid any fast spin or tumble. And if it works as the other jumps did, you'll see it as a little spot on the infrared camera as he jumps out of that capsule.
Oh, the door is not coming in.
Felix, we're only at 100,000 feet. You still got 28,000 feet to go. The door will open when you reach ambient altitude of 128,000 feet. And right now you're about 100,000 feet. So you got about 28,000 feet more to go. Just keep dumping the pressure and the door will open.
Okay, I'll wait.
So you notice that ascent did level off. He has reached the float altitude, and the balloon is not going much higher. It bobbles around up there, around the 128,000 mark. So that's about 24 and a half miles high. So they've told him when he stands out there on that little skateboard.
112,000 feet. Keep dumping her. She's coming up. Keep her going.
On that little skateboard-like platform. They've practiced this a lot, and they call the technique a bunny hop.
Okay, I'm waiting.
Supposed to jump off there, just kind of dropping. Because at first, as I say, you'll have no control because there's so little resistance. They do expect he may roll a little bit. He did last time. 7 or 8 times, actually. A gentle roll over. And that's not risky, not dangerous. What one hopes against is
Indicate about 112,000 feet now, Felix.
a fast spin.
Headed to 127.9.
Or tumble.
Roger.
But he has an emergency chute that if he were to tumble too fast, too many G-forces, would automatically deploy. So that's another thing to watch for, as long as you don't see that emergency chute come out in the first minutes of this jump. That's a very good sign. So the good signs would be no wild-looking tumble or spin, and no drogue chute suddenly coming out. So then, because that air is so thin, that's the point at which they expect that he will break through the sound barrier. Maybe 30 seconds after he drops off, he will gradually, at the beginning, he has no control at all, but toward the 30-second mark, he begins to get a little control, and he'll try to put his head down.
The door's not coming in.
Well, put the dump valve all the way to the rear. Put the dump valve all the way to the rear. There it is. There's the world out there.
The door has opened.
Roll the door open.
The door has opened.
The door stop, Felix.
Door is open. Door stop is engaged.
Okay, item 26. Move seat to the rear of capsule. Item 27. Lift legs into the door threshold.
Legs are at the threshold.
Item 28. Slide the seat forward. Okay, item 29. Release seat belt. Item 29, Felix. Release the seat belt. Attaboy. That's good. Okay. Slide forward into the rest position. Go a little bit further forward so we can check your chute. Your chute's okay, Felix. I say again, item 31, your chute integrity is checked. Your parachutes are not deployed. Item 32, verify cutaway knife handle strap is attached and knife in proper position. Say roger if it's so.
Roger.
Okay, chest pack faceplate heat is on. Make certain that's is on and you got a red light.
Red light is on.
Okay, here we go. Item 34, disconnect chest pack umbilical. Okay, do you read me, Felix, on the communications? Felix, give me a short count. Okay. Stow umbilical. Disconnect both oxygen supply hoses. Okay, are they disconnected? Give me a thumbs up if they're disconnected. They're still connected. Felix, disconnect the oxygen hose. Attaboy. All right, stand up on the exterior step. Keep your head down. Release the helmet tie-down strap. Start the cameras. And our guardian angel will take care of you.
All right, now the whole is working out. And at least you can see what I can see. Sometimes you have to get up really high. How small you are. I'm going home now.
Jumper away.
Well, that's very, very reassuring what we've seen there. That high-speed drop, and now you can see from the little dot, there's the applause.
David, you calling me?
He said something. Can't. Family applauding, but you can see by
Felix, can you hear me?
the little dot that he's in controlled descent.
2 minute into free fall.
So 2 minutes.
Keep talking, Felix. Keep talking.
Still can't quite make that out, but reassuring to hear his voice. And you can see how he's in control there. That's showing you the supply of oxygen in his oxygen bottles.
Yes, Felix, I hear you. Go ahead. Roger, go ahead. Go ahead, Felix, I hear you. Go ahead.
I have been following speed for a long time. Sounds like I had to pass out. For some reason. I can stop speed now. Riser.
Still free
Felix, you're
falling.
really stable. You've fallen 3.5 minutes.
Record
I
is
have been told before because my riser is smoking out. I'll repeat, my riser is smoking out. Right now.
so you can understand that. He said his visor was fogging up, but he's getting to warmer altitudes. There's the chute. There's the chute. So under parachute now.
Could have done it better myself.
There's
Felix,
from the
wind is
helicopter
out of the
now.
north at 5 to 10. Out of the north
Under
at 5
canopy,
to 10. And you can contact
floating
Mike Todd
safely,
on this frequency. Give Mike
floating
Todd
safely
a call.
down
Over.
to Earth. There's Ava Baumgartner.
Felix, the wind's out of the north, 5 to 10. Give Mike
Elated,
Todd a call.
tears
on
of
this frequency.
joy
Over.
from Mission Control as Felix now
Felix,
approaches the
I
ground.
hear you. The winds here are out of the east at about 10 to 15.
So we're now at 6,000 feet.
You ready, Felix?
This is Mission Control. Felix's current altitude under the chute is 6,600 feet.
Hey, I need direction.
So he has the highest
We're looking
jump.
for you, bud. We can't find you. The telemetry didn't work.
There he is. There's a closer shot from the helicopter.
Felix, the wind's out of the north, 5 to 10.
Beautiful shot.
Facing that big tower. Anybody can hear? I'm facing that big tower.
Okay, and the wind's out of the east. I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong information. Out of the east.
On your Felix, we're coming your way, bud. Hurry up, I need clear. Hurry up.
Approaching Earth.
Felix, wind is out of the east. The wind is out of the east.
Under parachute, you have
We see it. We're coming your way right now.
quite a bit of control by pulling
Roger
those.
that, Mike. Hurry up. Land down and show me the direction.
Wind's out of the east, Felix. Wind's out of the
By
east.
pulling the cords, he can control a fair amount of control on his path into this landing. Now we see that scrub earth below.
Felix's altitude is 5,800 feet.
Just 5,000 feet now, so really nearing the altitude out there. I'm not sure of the altitude of the ground.
Hey, don't come clear, guys. Don't come fucking clear.
Luke's making the call to drop smoke, Felix.
That means to
Wind's
drop
out of the
that
east, Felix.
smoke marker from one of the helicopters. Oh, he wanted to see, I see. He wanted the smoke so he could see the wind direction.
Hey, Felix, the wind is coming from the ridge. The wind is coming from the ridge. No, towards the ridge.
Art
Sorry.
Thompson,
The wind
the
is coming
technical
towards
director
the ridge.
of the Red Bull status program, telling him that the wind is coming from the direction of that ridge I was talking about. So he certainly got the highest jump mark that he was after. We'll find out about the Mach. Did he break the speed of sound as he hoped? Here he's coming. And there you can see by the approaching shadow, he's just about there, and he's down on the earth, safely back.
New world record holder.
Down on his knees. What a shot. So he has the new record.
And Mission Control shows recovery crew is at Felix's location. Also, Mission Control shows the balloon has been cut from the capsule, and the capsule is on its descent.
So in there fast. He has the world's record now for the highest jump by far. Around 28,000 feet. So more than 24 miles up. Successful after all this training, all this work, all this time. There is the capsule being lowered. It has been cut away from the balloon. Its parachute deploying automatically, and the capsule comes down to preserve the data and the pictures that are there. There's
Stratos capsule altitude is
family celebrating.
4,000 feet.
Mrs. Baumgartner, friends, Felix Baumgartner Sr., his father, all celebrating here at Mission Control. There's the recovery helicopter very near where he landed, out to the east of Roswell. Yeah, we have unofficial word there on some of those statistics. It was a 4 minute, and this was unofficial as they got it in Mission Control. 4 minute
Mission Control
and
shows
22
capsule at
second
88,000 feet and descending.
drop in free fall. So that would not break the Kittinger record for that. Would not break the record for the elapsed time of the free fall. And we'll see, did he break Mach? Those were speeds up in the 700 mile an hour mark. So I think that's unofficial and calculated a bit differently than the instrumentation aboard his
Capsule altitude,
pressure suit.
80,000 feet descending.
But that looks like he probably broke Mach, excuse me. But we'll see. That has to wait. And he broke the record, as we mentioned, for the highest manned balloon flight. So after some tense moments, the issue in flight with the visor, which was successfully resolved. There you have it.
Descending through
Aerospace
70,000
history
feet.
has been made today. Austrian pilot and parachutist Felix Baumgartner has done it. Made Red Bull Stratos mission to the edge of space a part of the record books. A successful climax to years of careful planning and development. Along the way, there were setbacks, snags in development of the equipment, weather delays. But today, Baumgartner and the Red Bull Stratos team are celebrating on the ground there at the scene now. More celebrations will follow here at Mission Control. So we're still awaiting final confirmation, but unofficially, new world records have been set for the highest free fall ever, the fastest free fall ever, as well as the highest ever manned balloon flight.